but most of all, she is a tireless advocate for students who are learning differently and for their families. Susan is holds a BA in sociology and did graduate work in English. She has 2 children, and her journey is incredibly moving. She advocated for her daughter, who was encountering learning issues in, what did you say, Dutch or Flemish?
Well, it's Flemish in Antwerp, but it's the Dutch language.
It was the Dutch language, and she stood up for her daughter, educated herself in the process, and what became a mother's concern turned into a magnum opus. I knew about Sue before I met her because the students who learn differently material on the FACO website is a veritable goldmine of resources and information for anyone interested in education, for anyone who has a child who learns differently, and then having met Sue through what used to be the Educational Support Committee and now the Education Task Force, I have the greatest respect and admiration and affection for her, and the greatest admiration for all she's done. Last year she published, she posted again to the FACO website a book-length compendium, and really it's an encyclopedia of material now called Students Who Learn Differently Overseas. Just a little bit background, only introduction. Sue has served in most capacities with AWC Antwerp, and in her FACO career, she's been FACO Board Secretary, 3rd Vice President, as well as Chair of the FACO Foundation Awards Committee, and Chair of the Resolutions and Recommendations Committee. FACO is honored here at this conference to host the launch of Susan van Alsenoy's first book, Learning Without Boundaries, and it is my privilege to introduce Susan van Alsenoy.
Okay, we're going to get going because this room needs to be used again shortly after we finish. So, here we go. LD is not an excuse. Okay, ready to go to work? Yes, it is a reason. And what's the difference between an excuse and a reason? You can just pass those out now if you want. In case people wanted to take notes, this might be a good time. The text of what I'm going to be telling you will be available on the website of this conference. I personally learned better if I can write it while I'm hearing it, so you might be that way also. So the difference between a reason and an excuse. A reason is a valid and often unavoidable reason for something that happens. For example, LD is a proven neurological condition over which an individual has no control. So it is a reason why things happen. An excuse, on the other hand, is a transparent attempt to shift blame away from oneself. I'm sorry, I'm late, I missed the bus. That's an excuse, because it's your fault that you didn't get to the bus on time. But if the person says, I'm sorry, I'm late, the bus broke down, that's a reason, because the person has no control over the mechanics of the bus. In the not-so-distant past, some people were kind enough to refer to dyslexia as a middle-class excuse for underachievement. But it is now scientifically proven that this is no longer the case, and that with the correct support and accommodations, we can change our chagrined learner into a happy investigator. How do we find the reasons that can help prevent the excuses? The Roman poet Virgil, he's the gentleman that wrote the Aeneid, tells us, happy is she or he who is able to know the causes of things. There we go. Perhaps since the beginning of thought, humankind has been looking for the hidden causes of things and developing strategies to harness their power. And how to accomplish this? Perhaps first and foremost, we need to look at the hidden causes within ourselves. In ancient Greece, people from all walks of life would travel to the Oracle of Delphi, who resided in the Temple of Apollo. And here are two representations of Apollo, one on a gold coin and the other in a mosaic where he's riding his chariot, in both cases bringing the sun up and down. He's also the god of poetry. So, carved in stone over the portico of the Temple of Delphi were these words: "Know thyself." In fact, this was such a favorite saying of the philosopher Socrates that he adopted it as his own motto. Lots of people think that perhaps this is one, if not the reason, for human existence, is to learn about ourselves. The 18th century English poet Alexander Pope, in his work called The Riddle of the World, reminds us, "Know then thyself, presume not God to scan, the proper study of mankind is man." Those interested in healing were perhaps the first to examine the hidden causes of things within themselves and ourselves. The Greek physician, Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine, told us the following: "Men ought to know that from the brain, and only the brain, arise our pleasures, joys, laughters, and tears. Through it, in particular, we think, see, hear, distinguish the ugly from the beautiful, the bad from the good, and the pleasant from the unpleasant. To consciousness, the brain is the messenger." So let's take a closer look at this fascinating organ. Most adult brains weigh a bit less than 3 pounds, between 1.3 and 1.4 kilograms. Our brains today are smaller than those of our ancestors. They use a tremendous amount of energy. While only around 3% of our body's weight, our brain commandeers 20% of the oxygen in our blood and 25% of the glucose. What has enabled our brains to rise to their current capacity to outlearn and outthink other species? The answer might lie in wrinkles. The surface of the human brain is convoluted by deep fissures, which you can see on the top drawing and the one directly below it, and smaller grooves called silice, and the ridges, which are called gyri. This whole surface is called the cerebral cortex. The folded, meandering surface allows the brain to pack in more surface area, thus more processing power, into the limited confines of the skull. However, lest we develop a too inflated opinion of ourselves, it might be good to bear in mind the fact that dolphins have even more wrinkles in their brains than we do in ours. Given modern imaging techniques like electron microscopes that magnify even beyond the cellular level, and functional magnetic resonance imaging scanners that let us see the living brain in action, for the first time in human history, we can see what a living brain looks like while it's in operation. And in a little bit, I'm going to tell you about a young man named Peter. And this is a scanner, not with Peter in it, but Peter, like this young man, was asked to do some reading within a scanner. And as you can see, the information is put up there so that they can actually scan his brain while he's attempting to read and see which sections light up and which ones are getting the most blood, actually, and oxygen at the time that that's taking place. It has been said that 90% of what we know about how our brain works we've learned only in the last 15 years. So all of this is relatively new, and you can understand why it hasn't gotten out of the labs and into the school classrooms by depth. Once we had these powerful enlargers and scanners, we were able to delve deeper into the structures of the brain. Different types of cells were discovered, the primary ones being the neurons and the Hela. And here we have a fairly typical neuron. They come in different shapes and sizes, but basically you have the cell body or the soma with the nucleus, and radiating out of that you have dendrites. Then you have a long axon, and surrounding the axon you have sheaths of myelin. And I'll get back and talk more about myelin in a bit. And at the end of the axon, you have the terminals, they're called here presynaptic terminals, that are going to make connections to the next neuron or neurons in line. You can't see too well, I'm sorry. But here you see two neurons. There's the soma or body. Here is the axon. Here's the presynaptic terminal. And the charge or message, it's actually an electrochemical reaction, can flow only in one direction. So it cannot go back that way. It always flows down the neuron. The tiny spaces between the neuron and the dendrite is called the synapse. So neurons do not actually touch one another. And this is extremely important to keep in mind because it allows us to recover from such trauma as stroke. We learn to develop new connections around the neuronal knots that are created by embolisms, blood clots, which is the same thing. Those of us that are into medicine. It also is the reason that remediation works, why we can teach different ways of thinking and new pathways can be joined because it's not one thing, it's two things, and if this isn't working, we can make connections with other neurons and think around it. And in this synapse, where there is no actual connection, is where the neurotransmitters like dopamine, which you often hear about, come into being. So you have the terminal releasing, and it shows it more. This is the crystalline structure of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Here, you see the presynaptic cell releasing whatever the chemical is, dopamine very often, and being picked up by the next neuron for the postsynaptic cells. And here we see, for the first time, the second most numerous type of cell in the brain, and that is the Hela. There are three types of Hela cells in the brain. We have the astrocytes that are concerned with neurotransmission and neurometabolism by providing physical and nutritional support for neurons. We have the oligodendrocytes. Thank you. She's my roommate. I can't make it without her. She usually teaches me how to pronounce these words before I perform. However, they're involved in the production of myelin. Remember, myelin surrounds the axon of the neuron and also acts as an insulating material. And the microglia, which are part of the immune system, they eat up bacteria and neurons that have passed their due date. Einstein's brain was a bit smaller than the normal brain and had about the same number of neurons per square centimeter. However, they say it had a greater abundance of these Hela cells, which comprise about 90% of the total brain cells. There are trillions and trillions of them, where there are millions and millions of the neurons. given this physical apparatus, how does it enable us to learn? A newborn baby might find a toy suspended above the playpen or the crib and be attracted to it because of the color or the noise or the fact that the caregiver shakes it and pays attention and draws the baby's attention to it. And then one day, while the child is lying on the back and contemplating this and making those what seem to us very often random movements with the feet and the hands, quite accidentally, the baby connects to the toy, making a trip from A to B and all the way down to G. But now, the baby is stimulated because it has improved its control over its environment. And so it's getting feedback that's valid to itself. And it's striving now to do this. And pretty soon it manages to hone its skills from A to B to F to G. And this is a big improvement. And then until bingo, they get to go directly from A to Z or to G. And I shouldn't make the G's and the Z's sound so much alike.
Doesn't bother me.
Well, you mustn't be dyslexic. Yeah. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's a lot about how we learn. Sometimes going from A to G isn't so easy because there might be something in between here that prevents the connection from being made easily. So perhaps this particular individual might always have to go from A to B to F. In other words, they're taking them longer to process information than it would somebody else. This is a concept called neural pruning. So here you see neurons, the soma or the body, and the axons and the dendrites. And if you go from A to B to C, that is a neuron that has been well stimulated and made many connections and has lots of growth to it. But if you have a neuron that falls into disuse, if you go from A to D to E to F, you can see that this neuron shrivels and shrinks and eventually will disappear and die if it's not put into use. And this is a very natural phenomena. It happens all during the learning process because, indeed, as we grow, as we learn, we do not use all of the possibilities of connections that we're born with. So let's now take a picture, a little look at Peter's brain. Now, Peter was a young man in the UK, was having trouble learning at school, and he was one of the lucky ones because his parents both realized that he had a problem. Sometimes only one parent does, and that can cause problems in families. But he was lucky, and his parents sought help early. It's very important to remember the earlier the remediation, the quicker and the more successful it will be. His parents, so this is what Peter's brain looked like before he received any extra remediation or instruction. And where the arrow is pointing, the left hemisphere, that is the area in most, in quotes, normal brains where reading processing takes place. Here. As you can see, in Peter's left hemisphere, there is absolutely no activity going on when he's being placed in an MRI scanner and being asked to read. Different parts of his brain are lighting up, but nothing in that particular part of the left hemisphere. But after remediation, this is what his brain looked like. And you can see how Peter's brain has been rewired. And it's absolutely remarkable. And the earlier you can get it done, the easier and the quicker it will happen. Okay, the lesson to be learned. Our brains are not hardwired from birth. New connections can be made, and tentative ones can be reinforced at any age. Strategies can be learned that will bypass neural knots. Our brains are plastic and malleable to experience throughout our lifetimes, and this is why interventions work. There are 2 times in our lives when there is an explosion of neuronal growth. Very early in childhood and the years just before the onset of puberty. Very important times, times ripe for learning. Windows of opportunity. It appears that some of these windows, once shut, will not be opened, cannot be opened again, or can be opened again or reopened only with great difficulty. Let's take a look at a moment at language acquisition. At birth, all of us are capable of learning any number of languages, or I should say most all of us. There are indeed people that don't have the physical capacity to do so, but most all of us are capable of learning any English, any language. Our mother could be English, our father could be Spanish, we could have a grandmother from Germany, and the person who helps around the house may be from France. If we interact with these people on a more or less daily basis from an early age, say beginning before 6 months, because it is evidently at 6 months that some of these opportunities for perception of sound start to disappear, neural pruning starts to take place. We will learn to speak that person's language. It's interesting, which I learned from the work done by the Association of Lives of Europeans, that you become, the child becomes language specific for that person. Even though they'll know that the 2 people speak the same language, it will still be language specific to the person that is speaking their native language. And evidently this must be face-to-face contact. Just watching a stranger speaking on a video doesn't do it for the brain. So not only is timing essential, so is presentation. And it's obviously more rapidly accomplished when it is a pleasant situation in which you are trying to understand what the other person is saying. So, in addition to timing and presentation, there's another vital component to your child's optimal growth and capacity to learn, and that is nutrition. Oh, I'm sorry, timing and presentation are the 2 things, primary things for language acquisition. So on to nutrition. Dr. Alex Richardson has written this book called They Are What You Feed Them. She's a senior research fellow at the Department of Physiology, Anatomy, and Genetics at Oxford University. It is she who is was the lead researcher in the double-blind placebo trial that proved for the first time scientifically that taking supplements of omega-3 fatty acids actually improves mood, behavior, and learning. There have been people that have thought this was true in the past. She's the one that did it. Always interested in the practical benefits of her investigations, she works with educational and health practitioners, as well as support groups and charities such as the Autism Trust and Dyslexia Research Trust. She says that she has written They Are What You Feed Them to share her discoveries on how diet can affect children's behavior, learning, and mood. And although they're relative to all children, she has found that these findings may be especially important to LD learners. Omega-3 fatty acids can be found in a lot of natural occurring substances. They are not something that we can manufacture in our bodies by ourselves. We have to eat them. So they can be found in these foods, eggs, Brussels sprouts, grains, fish, and up in the corner you see some supplemental pills that contain salmon oil. If you decide to take sure to check with your pharmacist that what you are buying is a pharmaceutical grade of omega-3, because there are so many impurities in fish these days, especially mercury. You want to be sure that it has been cleared or purified of all of those things. Yes?
What's the sort of brown one? Is that lentils?
Those are
in the
eggs.
In the middle?
Lentils.
Above the fish, are those lentils?
They're walnuts, fish, eggs, another kind of nuts, I think. And grains.
Grains.
Oh, great.
Yeah, but which grains?
Those look to me to be linseed.
Yeah.
And in the upper left corner?
That's the supplements.
Those are the supplements, yeah. Okay. When the children in this trial that I spoke about earlier were given the supplements in the form of pills, there was the group that was, it was a double-blind placebo, so there was a group that was receiving it and a group that wasn't, and they were compared. And it was found that reading progress was 3 times greater than would be expected for normal children of the same age. Spelling progress was twice as great as would be expected. And ADHD-type symptoms fell markedly. And this was true of difficulties in attention and concentration, as well as hyperactivity and impulsivity. The size of this effect was similar to that achieved by taking stimulant medications. So that's pretty amazing. I highly recommend that you get Dr. Richardson's book. It's a treasure trove of vital information. It can be ordered through her website, it's fabresearch.org, the FAB standing for Food and Behavior Research.org. And if you do buy it through her website, then her trust foundation will get a portion of the sales. So that will help her to continue on with her work. Because like she points out in the book, nobody is funding this type of research because it's not to your advantage to do so. So, now going back more to the focus of this presentation, how do we determine what is the proper kind of presentation to present material to our learners? And to begin thinking about this, we need to learn a bit about metacognition or metacognitive thinking. Not just thinking, but thinking about thinking. In the top one, if you are given a problem, what is 1 + 2? Well, of course, now we would just say 3. But if we present the answer without thinking about how we got to it, we're just thinking. But if we decide to think, well, how did I figure that out? Did I visualize it in my mind? Did I take 2 pencils and 1 pencil and then count them all together? How did I arrive at my conclusion? Then we are doing metacognition. So, now we're going to take time, this is after all the workshop, and we are going to investigate our own study styles, learning styles, and preferred multiple intelligences. I'm going to suggest that rather than fill out the actual sheet itself, and we'll do them one at a time, that you use the paper, the pad that was passed out to you by Rebecca.
Anybody,
There's another one, say more.
anybody need more pads?
Self-explanatory. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me.